WGPR Detroit HD2.
You're watching WHPS, Highland Park, Detroit. The views and opinions expressed on the following show are not necessarily the views and opinions of WHPS, its affiliates, management, or sponsors.
My name is Watson.
And my name is Mariah.
We're 12 years old.
And we're representing Old Redford Academy Middle School.
And we're here to talk about drugs.
Drugs are very dangerous and unhealthy.
And they can also ruin a relationship with your loved ones. Go talk to a family member, a friend, even a teacher, or you can go to a therapist, or if you need any extra help, you can go online and find all of those.
Hashtag not worth it.
And good afternoon and welcome to Expose Under the Sun, sponsored by the Detroit Native Sun newspaper. I'm your host, Darwin Griffin. And stay tuned. You are going to be enlightened by a testimony and by the words of wisdom that my special guest, Miss Ashley Lewis, is going to disseminate out on the show today. The show is live. Our calling numbers are area code 313-868-0342, 313-868-0351, or 313-868-4336. Website is www.tv33whpr.com, and you are watching us live from the awesome cities of Detroit, Michigan, under the auspices of the Honorable Mayor, Michael Duggan, as well as the fabulous city of Highland Park, Michigan, under the auspices of the Honorable Mayor Hubert Yap. We just completed a conference down at the Courtyard Marriott through the A. Philip Randolph Institute, or APRI. And this month is recognized for the great accomplishments that women are doing all over the country as well as all over the world. And my special guest today is one of those movers and shakers that has shook the pillars when it comes down to the labor industry, with what she does, what she has done, and what she will do. And without further ado, let me get to my special guest. Her name is Ashley Lewis, and she's got several different titles, but the two titles that I want to recognize right now is one with UAW. She's a national vice president, as well as with CLU. And I know those are acronyms that some people might not know what they mean, but I'll let her explain, in detail, UAW and CLU and what they mean and how she is a valued person in both of those organizations. Ashley, it is a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I do work for the UAW. I am a international representative within the women's department, and I am a national vice president within CLU under the UAW as well. In this moment, though, I first want to give honor to God, because for a labor activist, you have to have faith. Faith is evidence in the things unseen. And as a labor activist, we're constantly fighting for something we have not seen. We're fighting for something that we are hoping and praying that through our work, we can build collective equity where everyone has access to economics. So I first want to give honor to God. And then I want to say equally that I'm grateful for Vice President Estrada, even my immediate supervisor, Kathy Stoey, because I will say that it's important to have support within your organizations to do this kind of work, because it's difficult work, but I think by working collectively, it amplifies our impact.
Now, do you find too, and explain too what CLUE is as well?
So I like to explain to people that constituency groups are necessary, because if you understand what the AFL-CIO is, you understand that the UAW, for example, we represent 400,000 members and it's constantly growing. However, with the AFL-CIO, they have 12.5 million members. So the role of the constituency groups, they were really birthed out of the fact that there was an absence in the labor movement. One of the books that I think people should read is Solidarity Divided by Bill Fletcher. I love that book because it gives you the history of where there was the CIO before there was the AFL-CIO, and how these constituency groups, they bridged the gap between what was existing in union leadership at that time, and they created, and out of their creation, I believe that a lot of the things that were missing, right? Because you can't have a collective union movement if there's a lack of inclusion. It wasn't until 1935 that black people were allowed to be a part of unions. It wasn't until 1881 that women could join unions. Now, trade unions started in the 1800s, but they were exclusive. They were also relegated to those who were skilled. So if you weren't skilled, meaning you didn't have any formal technical education, you didn't have access. And so these constituency groups are significant. And CLUE is significant because what it does is it mobilizes women, right? Right now, you have a pivotal moment where you have Liz Schuler, who's over the AFL-CIO. Pivotal moment. But it's been realized, like, understand, from 1881 to 2022, that's how long it took for a woman to ascend within union leadership.
And even, during that time, women were not allowed to even vote at that time, because women weren't granted the right or to be able to vote until in the 1920s. So women were considered not as important as what their male counterparts were, even though they could still do the same kind of work, but were not being recognized for all of the hard work and the skills that they had. So let me ask this then. So how did you start in terms of, say, in your ascent to the position that you're at? Where did you start at?
So my home local is UAW Local 160. I started off in election committee, and I'll tell any young person, learn your documents. When you know your documents, it yields a different knowledge, a different understanding. And really, I went through a baptism by fire, I always say. But I started off as election committee chair. And then I became an executive board member. I was guide. Then I became an alternate committee person. And I will say, I am all the way pro women. But I will say that there have been a lot of men who have helped me, who have mentored me and guided me. At my location, my chairperson, he actually gave me a lot of latitude. So I was able to represent people. I was able to use to discuss with management ideas and thoughts that actually helped our people in the workspaces. And so that latitude was created by a guy. So I don't ever want to not include men and their support of women like me. But from that moment on, then I actually was laid off, and I was also, at the time I got elected to become the regional women's council chair. But I didn't start off at chair, because I think people need to understand that, just jump up. But I started off as a legislative chair, then I became co-chair, and then I was the chair. But then I got laid off, and then I went to Detroit Hamtramck for about 3 or 4 months. Then I was in Flint for about a year and a half. And then I landed back at my home local. But one thing I will say out of that, it was a lot of hardship in it, movement of my family, movement of my support system. But one thing it taught me was that this movement is so much larger. And really, the blessing of brothers and sisters in the union, because they helped me when I didn't have a support system. And while the corporations move us around like checkers, right? It was the membership that really kind of kept that glue. And it made me understand, like, we're all in one, right? It's not just the local, it's everybody.
So when you talk about the different locals, for the layperson who may not understand, who never worked in, in the factory or worked for, for any of the big three, what do you mean when you say the locals?
So my best comparison is if you look at a city, for example, the UAW is consisted of a lot of different cities. And so that's an analogy for a local. Each local operates differently, but of course they fall under the jurisdiction, and every city does. They fall under the jurisdiction of the state, and they fall under the jurisdiction of the federal government. Mm-hmm. And in the union, the locals fall under the region, and then they fall under the international. And so there's that same hierarchy in terms of ebb and flow. Mm-hmm. Although I'd argue in the UAW, I love that the members really feed it. Mm-hmm. It's not just a one-way up. It's completely a revolving circle of member input. And we make sure, especially where I'm at in the women's department, to not only empower women, but give them the opportunity to grow, to develop, because even under CLU and in the UAW, not only are we pushing women to run for elected positions, mm-hmm. but also to be activists, to be involved in the legislative process. Because right now we have, whether it's the Build Back Better Act and so many elements of that, that really helped women were eliminated, whether it be universal pre-K, getting better access to child care, providing more infrastructure for child care. Those are pieces of legislation that are integral to creating equity for women within the workspace. Because often there are many obstacles that prevent us from getting there, in addition to the fact that much of the work we do is unpaid. A lot of us don't want to acknowledge that we are caregivers for our children, I take care of my mom. We're caregivers for those around us, and it's unpaid labor. And a lot of people don't conceptualize that. But how do you complement that in a way that gives women access? How do you support women in a way that, let's say your husband has cancer and you need to take care of him? You might need a more flexible work schedule at that time. How do we address that? And legislation is essential in that. We can do a lot in collective bargaining, but if we have federal support, it makes a big difference. Because at the beginning of every contract, it says that it must align with federal laws and legislation. So if the federal government is here for workers, the union can take it here. And people need to conceptualize it's not either or, it's both and.
Now you hear people, talking about they don't want to unionize their shops or their organizations or their companies. Stress to the listeners in our audience the importance of unions.
So the importance of unions is solely deeply rooted in equity. So the fact that whether I'm a male or a female, I make the same amount of money.
And it doesn't matter about race.
It doesn't matter about race, gender. It doesn't matter about your faith. Mm-hmm. None of the things that create division within our society exist within our union.
Okay.
And especially as it pertains to wage. On average, if you're in a non-union workspace, women make 30% less than men. In addition to that, more women...
Repeat that again?
I said that in a non-union workspace, women typically make 30% less than men.
30% less than men?
And it gets higher and higher if you go by race, right? So black women make even less. And these are the realities that exist in a non-union facility. Mm-hmm. You don't have equity in pay. They create what I would call competition against workers. And see, in a union environment, we're all collectively working towards a wage that works for everybody. Everybody doesn't necessarily get everything that they want, but we all gain. And that's the essential difference. And we have a say in our workspaces. There's a lot to be said about walking into a union environment versus not. In the UAW Women's Department, we address issues that women deal with, whether it be having a lactation room because you've had a child and you're breastfeeding that child. Do you have the privacy to go to a space and be able to express milk? Do you, as a woman, have the ability to go take breaks as needed? Do you, as a woman, get the opportunity to be elected, to run? Like, these things don't necessarily happen if you look at these corporations who have worker meals. Look at the dynamics of them. And I'm not saying that we're perfect, but I am telling you that we are a huge step above much of the corporate societies, the non-union societies, you don't see women in leadership. You don't. I work for a vice president in leadership. Clue falls under the AFL-CIO, a woman in leadership. These are the difference makers that unions do, because they're not only training you, but they're empowering you as a woman to be capable of doing it.
So when you speak in terms of, say, about the labor movement, where do you see the labor movement at now for both males and females?
I see the labor movement moving towards economics.
Okay.
So we were both at a conference this past weekend, and I talked, and we presented, me and Mike Schultes from CWA, shout out Mike. But we talked about runaway inequality. Mm-hmm. And I think that males and females, Christians, Islam, it doesn't matter what nation you are from, what dynamic or label you like to put on yourself, economics. Economics is the focus of the labor movement right now, because it's a unifying topic. Because if you can address economics for the person living up in the UP or the person living in Detroit, then you are addressing an issue that affects us all. Mm-hmm. It's colorless, it's religionless, it doesn't have a gender to it. There's nothing to it but actually focusing in on how are these economics and how are these institutions of government that we have, how are they perpetuating economic inequality? How are they perpetuating oppression? And to me, that transcends, when you talk male, female, it transcends those gender roles, because we're talking about money. We're talking about how we tangibly give opportunities to our children. We talk about how we not necessarily become millionaires, but we do have a viable job that gives us a living wage, that gives us the dignity to be able to provide for our children. You know, maybe they need a prom dress, maybe they're graduating, or something as simple as being able to pay car insurance, because I know that's the issue. I'm a Detroiter. Car insurance is typically more than a car note. And so these are the obstacles that come into play when we're talking about economics, and wages, I believe, in economics are an essential component of the labor movement moving forward.
So when you talk in terms, you use the term that I know a lot of people don't use as much, but they need to start using more, and that's talking about a living wage as opposed to a minimum wage. And what is something that needs to be done to try and bring the wages up so that it is a living wage? Because you find that a lot of women that may be head of households may have to work 2 or 3 jobs to keep, a roof over their heads and their children's heads, to keep food on the table. And they may have to juggle so many different things, And so when we talk about that, let's look in terms of, say, at that living wage, and with what you do, what are you doing to try and help to kind of bridge that gap between the minimum wage to a living wage, so you wouldn't have to have women and men, for that fact, that have to work multiple jobs? They might have to, let's say, if somebody's working in a factory, they may have to moonlight and do another job working, doing something else. So what is being done? What do you see is happening there?
I think that transcending the idea that union is exclusive to factory. Mm-hmm. Union is for anybody looking for a say in their workspaces, to collectively bargain, to have wages, because I know on a General Motors side that a lot of those managers, they don't discuss with each other what they're getting. Mm-hmm. They're constantly competing with one another, and they're all losing, because I listened to what they were saying. And many of them, one was getting this and that, but it all, in terms of economics, they were losing as far as I was concerned. So transcending that thought and that ideology. And with CLUE specifically, and falling under the AFL-CIO umbrella and a lot of the women's groups that they have, we have Screen Actors Guild, right? We have the Nurses Association. You have SCEIU, the service industry. You have communication workers. And so the work is to truly transcend this thought and this ideology that because you aren't blue collar that you don't need a union. No, you need a union, because at the end of the day, you are making, let's say, $15, $16 an hour working at Amazon, and Jeff Bezos is flying into space. He's got enough money to have his own NASA. Like, understand, like, that's a whole government funded program. This one man has enough money to play and go into NASA. And so it's like, what are we doing here that we think that you don't need a union? And so to me, it's transcending that thought and ideology that is solely for blue collar. No, it's for anybody and everybody who wants dignity within their workspace, acknowledgement, in equity and pay. Because when you collectively bargain, we actually make 30% more in whatever sector we are in because you're collectively bargaining, not to mention the benefits that we have. That being said, though, what was the other question? Sorry.
So the main thing I wanted to find out too is that when you talk about, because let's tap into, because I know we've only got a few minutes left, but let's tap into, you said about doing the workshop with you and Mike Schulte. What are we doing in terms of, say, because we need to bridge that wealth gap where you've got the CEOs, like you mentioned, Jeff Bezos and some of these other CEOs, that are doing things that, but what about the people that have made those companies solvent like they are today? And then when you talk about the women and the work that they're doing, is there equity when it comes to the type of work that women are doing and compared to what men are doing? And you as a national VP, what would you recommend, or what do you think in terms of, say, with women, and just to kind of give some advice in this few minutes that we have left to women that might have an issue when it comes down to the minimum wage versus the living wage, looking at the equity in terms of, say, in their workplace, in their workforce, having some amenities in terms of, say, to where it will allow women to be women and do things like you said, have children and still be able to go and take time off, or as you said, have an area where they can go if they're lactating, where they can have an area where they can go and so give some final words or some final thoughts to women that may be aspiring or working in a place where there is no union. They may feeling like they're not getting the same kind of amenities as their counterparts who are men, but they're doing the same kind of work that the men are doing. What would you say to those individuals?
I would say that, especially as a CLU VP, I really want to push that collectively as women, we can create legislation that not only helps you, but the union will amplify whatever it is that we're able to get. Mm-hmm. Because what we see that happens is, for example, with the Build Back Better Act, things change. The legislation changed based upon the representatives that are in there. Mm-hmm. However, with the collective bargaining agreement, that's concrete. You are negotiating for benefits for women. It creates equity as soon as you walk into that door, and that work is identified within that collective bargaining agreement. Mm-hmm. You are now a part of an institution that is going to work to make sure that you are included. Equally, I will say that women specifically, they bear a lot of the disadvantages as a worker. Primarily because they dominate the service industries, mm-hmm. they dominate the care industries. These are women industries. And so it's more important for us to be involved from a legislative standpoint. And when we talk about minimum wage versus living wage, the reality of it is a minimum wage means that you're barely making it, right, if you're making it. Mm-hmm. Most likely, minimum wage, you're probably living in your car because you probably can't afford to pay your car note, pay your insurance, and pay rent. So that's what minimum means. Living wage means you go to work and you come home and you have enough money to take care of your children, to run your household. That's a living wage. And that's the dignity that anybody should want. Because right now, a CEO makes 800 times more than the average worker. If you can't see the issue in that, because I guarantee you as a worker, you're contributing more than that CEO is. Now, I'm not going to take away their degrees and all of that, but 800 times is egregious. And so right now in this space, we are working more than we ever have. If we're being honest, we are more productive than we ever have been. And yet they want to keep us at minimum wage. No, we need living wages. We need wages that help us thrive, our families thrive, and our communities thrive.
Well, and we've got a few minutes really seriously left. And I know that you mentioned to me before we did the show that you're going to seminary school. And you're starting to see more and more women getting into the ministry. Why is that? Why do you see more and more women? You know, where there was a time when people were kind of, it was stereotyped, where it was a male-oriented, you know, arena, where you would go into a church and you see men up in the front in the pulpit, trustees, deacons, but now you're seeing women. How is that changing, and how do you feel as you're seeing the change? Because I know you're a member of Fellowship Chapel under Dr. Wendell Anthony, and you've got some great tutors that are working with you. And I know you mentioned about Cindy Estrada, you know, earlier, and some of the other people that you know, with. But who, just in the quick little time that we've got left, who are some of your mentors? Who are some of the people that you look up to, that you respect, that you want to, excuse the expression, be like when you grow up?
Of course, I have to pay homage to Reverend Dr. Wendell Anthony, especially when we're talking about seminary. Pay homage to Cindy Estrada, who gives spaces to women. I got to pay homage to my immediate director, assistant director, Kathy Stowey. And I always want to give homage to Mama Connie, is what I call her, but it's Reverend Dr. Constance Simon, because she's the one who really helped me when I lost my father, taking care of my mom, going through a divorce. She consoled my soul, and so I owe her a great deal. And I also have to say, Mike Kohler, he'll probably kill me for this, but he's just a person that helped me in the union movement behind the scenes and helped me grow and cultivate and learn how to fight for myself. I think sometimes as labor women, we're fighting for everybody, but we aren't fighting for ourselves.
Right.
So to me, that was, they have been integral into that. And what I will say is that the church is always, the backbone of the church has always been women, but it wasn't always integrated into the leadership. And for me, as a young black female, it was interesting because in my church, it wasn't unbeknownst to me. I never even knew that women weren't allowed to be ministers, because we have a couple women ministers at our church. So I wasn't even aware of that. But the exclusivity of the church is a reflection of the society that is within.
Right.
And women specifically, whether it be in biblical times to present times, have constantly been disregarded despite their integral nature. They were necessity, and yet they were disregarded. And so that's why I feel like you have a rise in that, because I believe in womanist theology. And in America, the black female is the lowest person. So if I can help the black female, then I help everybody. It amplifies everybody. If I can give that experience and help amplify everybody, that's what called me. And that's where I feel like a lot of women are finding agency and autonomy and hope to push for equity, not only within religion, but in society.
I totally agree. And I think that the thing is, this time has come to the end. I appreciate you being on the show. I definitely would love to give you an invitation to come back again, to be on the show again, because we really kind of just touched the surface of the women's movement, especially in Women's Month this month. But I want to thank my special guest, Miss Ashley Lewis, and she is the CLUE and UAW National Vice President. But you've been watching Expose Under the Sun, sponsored by the Detroit Native Sun newspaper. If you'd like to advertise in the Native Sun newspaper, you can contact Ms. Valerie Lockhart, and you can contact her at area code 313-457-5944. And you can pick up a copy of the Detroit Native Sun News in a lot of local supermarkets, banks, and other businesses throughout the Detroit and Wayne County areas. Again, thank you to Ashley Lewis. Thank you to the listening audience. Have a very, very safe and peaceful remainder of this day. Have a good one.